Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, you might not know that I'm a professional mediator, and a lot of the workplace mediations that I do are actually with small businesses. And to be honest, I often find these types of mediations particularly challenging. When I'm doing a mediation with a small business, of course, the effect of conflict tends to be a lot more profound. If there's tension and stress happening within a few of the relationships within your team, or if you've got staff off sick or maybe not being able to work at least to their full capacity, then of course it has a lot more impact because you've got a higher percentage of your team being involved. The other challenge with small businesses, particularly when they're looking at resolving conflict, is that they've often got a situation where they're all very thinly stretched, and you might often have people that are managing who are wearing a number of different hats. So it's not uncommon for the HR manager to also be the compliance manager and maybe business development or something like that as well, which means that they might not have the same level of specialist training or time to dedicate to performing some of those functions within each of the different roles that they hold. So what I thought could be useful today is just to talk through some of the best advice that I often give to small business owners, either preemptively when they're first calling me and considering workplace mediation, or afterwards as we're talking through strategies to prevent the same problems from coming up again down the track. So, the first general guidance that I often suggest is to just really reflect on the influence that you're having and the importance, therefore, of self regulation. If you can find a way to keep yourself calm, to act composed, to send a message to your team that you're not flustered and you're not flapped, and we can get through this, and this is a difficult conversation, and you're engaged and curious and solution focused, but you're willing to push through this together even though it feels uncomfortable, this is important stuff to talk about. Or even though I'm upset and feeling a little bit stressed and overwhelmed in the moment, I'll do my best to convey an image of it's almost like a duck above water. And we want to show this presence of being calm and composed, even if underneath the surface, like the duck's little legs paddling and paddling, you probably are having a little bit of internal panic happening. But what that means is that if you're able to regulate your own nervous system, you start to influence the other people around you. And if you can keep your voice calm, that low speed, low tone, lower volume, that type of thing, what tends to happen is that it inherently influences the other people around you. So in effect, you're almost co-regulating their nervous systems. And in a lot of situations, what you would want is to have a team that are steady and stable and composed and logical and rational and all the rest of it, which means that you can influence them and improve their capacity for doing that simply by the way that you act. And the key to that is self-regulation. So thinking about what do you need to do to stay calm, you can plan and predict and prepare for some of the situations, particularly if you're looking at a pattern, like there's a particularly busy time in the restaurant that you're running, or there's a particular group of clients that tend to be a bit of a nightmare to deal with. The next tip is to clarify expectations wherever possible. This is often the foundation for trust to be built. If people know what to expect and then they see the other person follow through with it, that's often the point where trust is built. It's not usually asking someone to trust me, and even if we decide to trust someone else, I mean, what are we really doing? It's really just saying we'll give them the chance, I guess, give them the benefit of the doubt. But as much as possible, where you can clarify expectations, like this is how late is acceptable on your shift, like 5 minutes, I understand that will happen from time to time. If it's more than 5 minutes though, could you send me a message so that I know that you're running late? Just make sure that people know what to expect and remove any of that ambiguity that might come from the types of values conflict that you would come across. Like what's respectful or what's professional or what's appropriate communication? Is swearing okay? Is it all right to use your phone during a meeting? All of these things in small businesses tend to lead to conflict when they're not addressed because of that mismatch of expectations. So if your goal is to reduce the amount of conflict or prevent conflict from coming up down the track, clarifying expectations is often a really helpful starting point. The next bit of advice that I often give to small business owners is to use structure where possible. If you're noticing that there are recurring issues coming up within your team, maybe there are structural options for solving this. If you've got staff who constantly don't wear the right protective gear, the PPE equipment, maybe changing the location that that's stored so it's within easy access would prevent you from having to constantly harass and nag everybody within the team to do the right thing. Or if there's a particular decision that tends to cause conflict, like staff are getting upset because they feel like the roster is unfair or something like that, just putting a structure in place to balance things in a more fair way. Each person has one request for change. What you need to do is find a different staff member who's willing to swap with you. In that case, I'm willing to go ahead and approve up to that one per month limit. So that would be an example where if you've got this recurring problem within the roster, maybe explaining to staff that this is the system that you're going to use would prevent conflict from coming up down the track. The fourth piece of guidance that I wanted to offer is to listen first and talk second. To spend most of your time, at least as far as conflict goes, listening. Well, I've noticed that you've been late a couple of times, and that's unusual for you. Is everything okay? I just want to touch base and find out what's going on before we jump in and say, you need to be more on time. What the heck's going on here? If there's a problem that a staff member seems to be having, just taking that curious and empathetic approach first. It doesn't close the door. It doesn't remove your option to be firm and hold on to boundaries if needed. But starting with a question mark, that little piece of punctuation at the end of a sentence might mean that you end up finding a lot more buy-in and engagement with the staff that you're dealing with. So the final tip that I wanted to give is simply to recognize when you're in a dilemma. I think inherent within running a small business is a lot of situations where you need to choose between two bad options. And so if you're dealing with conflict, for example, within a team, there will be a point where enough is enough and you reach the conclusion that this situation just can't continue. And so you'll need to make a difficult call then. It might be giving a staff member a formal warning, like putting them on a performance management plan if that's something that you've got at your work. And that is not an easy thing to decide to do because, of course, there's going to be fallout. The person's going to be annoyed and upset with us, and they might go off on leave, they might quit. There's a number of different things that might happen. At the same time, if you do nothing and let the negative behavior continue, then that's also going to cause problems. It might impact on trust within the team, or distracting you and taking your time, or it's upsetting other people or impacting your clients. So neither of these options is good. Let's just acknowledge that. I think the reason that a lot of people procrastinate is because it's a type of perfectionism. They think that they need to get it right. And the challenge there is that they're probably subconsciously assuming that there will be some plan or path forward that all of a sudden makes sense. The clouds part and the sun shines down and all of a sudden the way ahead is clear. That's just not realistically how running a small business works. It's mostly very difficult decisions and doing your best to figure out what's going to happen. And then unfortunately, a lot of the time making pretty painful mistakes along the way and doing your best to make sure that it doesn't bring you completely undone. So when you're dealing with conflict in particular, just acknowledging the fact that this is a dilemma. I've got two bad choices, and then approaching the decision in a bit of a logical, rational way, like a cost-benefit analysis. Well, if I do this, this is the benefits and these are the potential risks. If I do this, these are the benefits and these are the potential risks. Fast forward, how would that play out in 6 months' time? Where would I be sitting as I look back and wish that I'd done something differently? And then make a decision. And just appreciate the fact that you're probably not going to feel great about it. It's not going to sit well. You'll lose some sleep. You'll probably have some stressful experiences coming up. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do what you need to do. So I hope that those tips have been helpful for you, particularly if you're someone who runs a small business and you're dealing with conflict. If you've got a question about anything that I've talked about or an idea for a future video, please leave a comment below. Thank you very much for listening. Bye for now.